prior to the remarks from Seiji Lippert. I'll say something about the discussion in the panel, and then I'll introduce the speakers. We're going to continue this morning's considerations of, to borrow Francois's phrase, the benefits of taking a different angle. In this panel, we'll consider first the particular challenges for Japanese studies south of the equator in Australia, and then the multilingual challenges for Japan-related scholarship in Korea in contributing to a global discussion. Finally, we will hear from Director Chano of the Japan Foundation, looking at the status of public funding from a historical perspective, that is, via a consideration of the 1970 SSRC ACLS report and its moment in comparison with our own, and to use that to take stock of where we are now. It should be a fitting close to our presentations, and I'll look forward to the discussion that follows. I am Bill Marotti of UCLA's Department of History. I'm also chair of the MA Interdisciplinary Program in East Asian Studies. And I will now introduce our speakers in order. Our first speaker will be Professor Carolyn Stevens, Professor of Japanese Studies and Director of the Japan Studies Center at Monash University, and since 2011, the President of the Japanese Studies Association of Australia. She's also editor-in-chief of the interdisciplinary journal Japanese Studies, which is published by Routledge. Her research ranges quite broadly from work on social problems in Japan, focusing on issues of disability and poverty primarily, to work on post-war popular music and consumerism, with current projects on sonic politics in Japan, joining with colleagues at the University of Melbourne, Harvard, UC San Diego, and Nichibunken in Kyoto. Also an edited volume on internationalization in contemporary Japan, and work on the cultural politics of the Asian leg of the Beatles' 1966 World Tour. I'll look forward to that. Professor Stevens' books include On the Margins of Japanese Society, Volunteers and the Urban Underclass, Japanese Popular Music, Culture, Power, and Authenticity, and then most recently this year, Disability in Japan. Our second speaker, Professor Cholhee Park, professor at the Graduate School of International Studies and a director of the Institute of Japanese Studies at Seoul National University. Before coming to Seoul National University, Professor Park served from 1999 to 2002 as an associate professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Japan, as well as assistant professor at the Institute for Foreign Affairs and National Security under the Korean Foreign Ministry. He's also held teaching positions at Columbia, Keio Daigaku, and Kobe. His book publications include The Making of a Member of the Japanese Diet in 2000, which is a study of electoral strategies in urban Japan following the electoral reform. In Korean, a book on LDP politics and the transformation of the post-war system in Japan. The former book was in Japanese, I should say, from 2011. Professor Park is, of course, the author of numerous articles on Japanese politics, Korea-Japan relations, and international relations in East Asia. He's also a frequent commenter on Korea-Japan relations and international relations in East Asia on major Korean and Japanese, or in major Korean and Japanese newspapers and NHK. He's also the recipient of the first Nakasone Yasuhiro Award in 2005 for his contributions to the Korean-Japan relations. And then finally, Director Junichi Chano, a triple director, Director General of the Japan Foundation, Regional Director for the Americas, and Managing Director for the Center for Global Partnership. Director Chano joined the Japan Foundation after graduating from Doshisha in 1982, initially serving as Deputy Director in the Bangkok office and then Assistant Director of the Japanese Language Division at the Foundation's Tokyo headquarters. He then returned to study at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, earning a master's degree in government administration, and then came back to the Japan Foundation as director of the Center for Global Partnership, overseeing the administration of some $20 million in grant programs promoting Japan-U.S. policy-oriented research and dialogue projects. And on his return to Tokyo in 1999, served as director of the Regional Coordination Division of the Japan Foundation, then Deputy Executive Director of the Center for Global Partnership. And after a year and a half in D.C. as a visiting fellow at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, he's assumed his current post. And he also, Director Chano also serves as adjunct lecturer at the Faculty of Law at Doshisha. So without further ado, why don't I welcome up Professor Stevens. And let's see, I'm part German, so I'll give you some time signals, but I also have an Italian last name, so I'll probably forget. So please try and manage yourself.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I want to echo my fellow panelists' gratitude to the University of California, Los Angeles staff, academic, and professional staff who have assisted us, and to all the donors and supporters in the community here today. It's fun to go in the last panel because I get to reflect on what other people say. I can say, hey, all right, I'm from Australia, and think of us like, we're kind of geographically like Hawaii. We're in the middle, sort of way out in the middle of nowhere, down under, and we have British system-style funding. So we have the same pressures on our state, well, they're actually federally funded universities out in the middle of nowhere. But to give you some ideas about what we do down under, I think there are some specific issues that you might find interesting and maybe unexpected. So first of all, let me introduce you to the building. We are not a virtual center. We are a physical building with bricks and mortar. And actually, it is both one of the most wonderful things about being the director of the Japanese Studies Center and one of the most difficult things. In 2011, this center is, of course, established in, go to the next one, in 1981 but from a private donor. It was opened in 1984 and it renovated it again. So the private donor put down the money first. There was money from the Toyota Corporation to renovate in 96. And the renovation in 2012 was actually a university a donation from the center. However, in 2012, at the end of 2011, we were told that the university would no longer subsidize its upkeep in terms of, just like paying the electricity bills, the cleaning bills, the heating, the cooling, the water. And so the management of the building came to us. And so what they did was that they renovated it one more time, and we were allowed to use it. Basically, the way we pay for its upkeep is by renting out the rooms to the university community. And it's because it's such a beautiful spot, it's very popular. The Department of Medicine is always renting it for their faculty planning days. They love it, and especially in the spring, the cherry trees out in the front, it's very beautiful. The other thing that's happened is that some of the offices, including the director's office, was transformed into a teaching space. So now other departments in the university rent this, what we call an e-studio, which is state-of-the-art smartboard, whiteboard, and it has about 30 laptops that are connected to this whiteboard in this room. And so we rent out the space to other parts of the university in order to pay our bills. So you can see it's been beautifully renovated. This is the foyer here. You're looking into the Yuri Nastupny Auditorium, and I must say that those of you who know the area of Japanese linguistics, not my immediate predecessor, but the two professors before me was the esteemed Yuri Nastupny, and I've had to fill some pretty big shoes. He established the department at Monash in the 1960s, and you could say he really spearheaded the entire program nationally during that, what we call the Japanese tsunami in the 80s and 90s. So the other thing, there are other offices in the building, and there's the Melbourne Center for the Japanese Language Education. We call it MCJLE. It was founded in 1997 with a joint donation from the Nippon Foundation and matching funds from Monash. Now, the main feature garden along the side of the boardroom is this Japanese garden. It's called Rogaen, after the vice chancellor who made a personal donation to have it built, Professor Logan, so we call it Rogaen. And I just show it. It's very beautiful, and this is part of the reason why many internal departments, but external to Japanese studies, want to rent it. They like to have their board meetings here. But I'll just point out that the bamboo fence is beginning to fall down, and I've got to find funds to fix it. So that's a concern. It's wonderful to have a building, but you've got to take care of it. And it's one of my main concerns as the director of the center. Now, I'll note, I spoke earlier about our publication. We had a very vital publication series from about the 1980s on. We're winding it down, and part of that is, again, echoing some of the things that have already been said about e-publishing being the way to go forward, but also, I think, importantly, with the equivalent, we call it Excellence in Research Australia, the ERA, which is a carbon copy of the RAE in the UK, that in-house publications are ranked they don't figure into ERA rankings. So we are discouraged from publishing hard copy. And I'll also point out we don't have a library, and it's not because we don't have a lot of books, but Monash, the main library, the Lewis Matheson Library, has probably the largest collection of Japanese language books in Victoria, second probably only to Canberra with its combined collection at the NLA and ANU. And so there are two collections, a Japanese language education collection and a general collection in the Asian studies. So we don't keep our books on campus. However, we have a manga library. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary of the manga library with an international exhibition and symposium. Now this is, I think, where Australia sort of steps apart from the other universities. Education, tertiary education in Australia is widely touted by all stakeholders as an export industry, and this is the reason why. There were 280,000 international students in Australia last year. That may not seem like much, but that's 20% of total university enrollments. And of those, almost a third are in Victoria. So my regional area is very focused on tertiary education as an export. I'll also point out that there's a very large number of Asian-born Australian citizens attending university. And, however, in 2008, we found that fewer than 6% of Australian Year 12 students were studying Asian language. Now, why is it with all of these Asian people in Australia, why is no one studying Asian languages, Japanese languages? It's because they already speak it at home. However, fewer than 5% are studying about Asia, which is a bit of a worry. And at Monash, there are 21,000 students. So Monash, my university, actually is a little bit higher than Victoria and 10% higher than the national in terms of its density of international students. But I'll point out that the majority of these international students are in what I call BusyCon. I could learn that today thanks to one of your students. We call it Buzz Echo. They come from North and Southeast Asia. The main say, sender countries, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And I'll also point out that 70% roughly of the students that I teach face-to-face are either international students from these countries or Australian-born citizens with Chinese background. So what that means is that I'm teaching Chinese students about Japan in English. And I'll just point out that this is about, this is our pedagogy, that we teach Japan, we teach Asia to help students appreciate cultural difference, become more critically aware of social inequity and power relations, and to envision a more democratic society. That's our sort of disciplinary creed. However, when we do that, are we really teaching about Japan? I find myself often on the back foot. Teaching any Asian language or European language or South American language is going to deliver that same educational outcome. So I have to argue, what's special about Japan? Well, whether it's good or bad, what's special about Japan is, again, the relationship to the government. In November of last year, the federal government announced an issues paper, which was followed by a white paper, and now we're in the implementation stage. Last Friday, I spent 4 hours with members of DFAT who'd come down from Canberra and other stakeholders in education and industry to discuss what Julia Gillard has termed Australia in the Asian century. Now, we're very lucky that Gillard decided to choose China, India, Indonesia, Japan, and Korea as the 5 main regions of importance. And so we're all like, oh, we made it, because Japan fits in close second to China, battling with India for prominence. And this is all about trade. This is all about security. Now, we have been given the mission to promote Asian literacy, which is language skills, which is cultural and historical knowledge, and also to assist with that border pedagogy with cultural assimilation of sojourners and permanent residents in Australia from Asia. And what I find my challenge is to support this important government role, but also to remember that we don't just study Japan to make money from them. We study Japan because we are intrinsically interested, fascinated, and we love Japan. So that's my message from Australia. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank Terasaki Center and Professor Abe for inviting me to this important conference. I have not prepared for the PowerPoint file because if you see there is a PowerPoint file, nobody watches me, nobody looks at me, and then nobody remembers my face later. So I made a strategy to just to talk. I'll give a 3-point presentation. One is about I think I heard a lot of story from many people from another country's situation. I think you want to know what is going on in Japan, in Korea, about the Japanese studies. And I briefly talk about our institute activity, and then talk about the challenge of the future as for the Korean studies, the Japanese studies in Korea. First of all, I think. I'd better explain the distinctive features of Japanese studies in Korea in 2 senses. One, Korea is the closest neighbor to Japan. So I have the luxury of visiting Japan quite frequently, unlike Ted or Chris. I go there at least once in 2 months for my field research or interview, so I can easily cross over the country and then meet people and then see the spot in reality. So that gives me a lot of advantage. But I'm not the only one because we have as the countries are so close, we have a natural interest in Japan. And then as we have a biggest community of scholars doing Japanese studies in Korea. At least, I think roughly speaking, more than 2,000 PhDs are in Korea who are doing Japanese studies. Many of them are humanities or specialists, like linguistics, Japanese language, or literature, history, kind of thing. So the vast majority of them are humanities people, but there's an increasing number of social scientists at the same time. When I looked at the data, we have Japan-related departments at 48 universities in Korea. And then I'm very jealous in a sense that you have, Chris, you have only one British Association of Japanese Studies. You have one Australian Association of Japanese Studies. I looked up. We have 14 the Japanese-related associations. Wow, 14. So one, for example, one association, the Korean Association of Japanologists, which is much more humanities-oriented one, they have a membership of 1,500 people, all PhDs. So an organization I'm working very actively, the Korean Association of Contemporary Japanese Studies, mostly political scientists, about 100 members. So any association has 100 to 1,000 members. So we have a large number of Japan specialists in Korea. The problem is that they are not fully exposed to the international community of scholars. But still, we have very good the large community. So I think the challenge I will talk about is how to bring all those Japan specialists to the international community of scholars, because we have a very rich and deeply going the research about Japan. But this is very rich, deep, wide area of study. This is good, but on the other hand, there is one critical disadvantage we have, because Korea had a very unhappy experience with Japan, being colonized in the past. So this limits the scope of study and then the nature of funding kind of thing. So the one of the kind of taboo word in Korea is he is or she is pro-Japanese. This is a taboo for the forbidden topic. So if you say, oh, Professor Park is pro-Japanese, they look at very, it's not a kind of a Christian Demon Club or the Japan Hands. It's very the negative the connotation in Korea. So I think it is because of the legacy of colonial legacy in Korea. And then the soft power of Japan is not fully introduced. Even though they enjoy it, they do not feature it in an academic way. Also, the objective understanding of contemporary Japanese politics and diplomacy is slightly skewed in a sense that because of the historical experience we have. And the bigger constraint is that we have limited funding sources from Japan especially. The Chano-san's wife is working for Sasakawa Foundation. I can never think about contacting Sasakawa Foundation for helping my institute. Even though Santori Foundation and Subisawa Foundation, even though they are there, I know the CEO of there, but I never ask them to give money. So this is a kind of situation that constrains the Japanese studies in Korea. About my institute, we have about the 10 full-time professors at my institute, and then 17 adjunct professors on campus, and I have a dozen of the scholars who are participating as editorial members of journals we publish. So we have extensive network in Korea who are the best known specialists. And then the major projects we are doing is we are doing a Humanities Korea project, which is a $1 million project to study contemporary Japan's changing life world experience. And then we are continue to producing books, at least 2 books a year. And then we are producing the publishing Japan review, Nihon Hihyo in Korean, and then many special issues are published there. So last one was about minority in Japan. Coming one is about the Japanese emperor. The next one is about the Japan's conservative turn. So it's a very all diverse topics. And then we have a biggest collection of Japan-related books and journals in Korea. So as other institutes, we hold the seminars and colloquiums inviting the eminent members from overseas and Korea. We had Jerry Curtis last month. We are going to have Wakamiya from former editor, the chief writer of the Asahi Shimbun next month, kind of thing. So we will continue. We are doing it. And then I, as a new director, putting emphasis on bringing up next generation specialists, Japan specialists, focusing on MA students, PhD students, and the rookie PhDs. So I'm trying to expose them to Japan by sending them to Japan for field research or extensive interviews and other things. I think we are making a good progress in that field. Having said that, I would say that 3 challenges are here in Korea. One is that I told you that we have 14 different associations of Japanese studies